I never expected that a frantic text from my neighbor would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. For most of my 26 years, my life had been a carefully curated collection of quiet routines. My world was the soft scratch of a stylus on a digital tablet, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, and the predictable hum of the city filtering through my apartment window. It was a safe world, a solitary one, and I thought I was content with that. I was wrong. My name is Lucas, and I work from home as a freelance illustrator. My apartment was my sanctuary, a third-floor walk-up in a building old enough to have settled into its own personality, complete with creaky floors and temperamental plumbing. I knew the rhythm of the place, the sound of Mrs. Gable's terrier yapping on the floor below, the scent of takeout from the apartment next door. It was a life built on observation from a safe distance, and for a long time, that was enough. Then Caleb moved in across the hall. He was the complete opposite of my quiet existence. He announced his arrival not with a polite note, but with the sound of a power drill at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. He was noise and energy, a whirlwind of sawdust and loud, cheerful phone calls that echoed in the hallway. I'd see him coming and going, usually in a paint-splattered t-shirt and work boots, his dark hair perpetually messy, a smudge of something on his cheek. From my carefully guarded perspective, he was a lot. He seemed effortlessly confident, the kind of guy who knew how to fix things, who could talk to anyone, who probably spent his weekends playing some sport with a large group of equally confident friends. He was also, to my internal dismay, incredibly handsome. He had broad shoulders and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes that were a startlingly warm shade of hazel. He was the kind of man I drew in my private sketchbooks but never imagined I'd actually talk to. In my mind, a clear and insurmountable wall existed between us. He was a creature of the bright, loud, tangible world. I was a resident of the quiet, internal one. We were two different species, operating on different frequencies. I assumed, with the certainty of long-practiced self-protection, that he was straight. It was easier that way, safer. It turned my hopeless admiration into a harmless, private observation, like watching a bird outside my window. I could appreciate the beauty without ever needing to get close. Our interactions were minimal, limited to the awkward dance of apartment dweller etiquette. A quick nod in the hallway, a forced, tight-lipped smile as I tried to maneuver past him and his collection of tools. "Hey," he'd say, his voice a low, easy rumble that always seemed to catch me off guard. I'd offer a quiet, "Hi," and scurry back into my apartment, my heart doing a stupid little flutter against my ribs. It was pathetic, I knew, but it was my routine. Safe, predictable. That is, until the Tuesday it all changed. It was a rainy evening, the kind where the sky is a bruised purple and the city lights smear against wet pavement. I was deep into a project, lost in the lines and colors on my screen, the only sounds being the drumming of rain against the glass and the soft lo-fi playlist humming from my speakers. My phone, which had been silent on the corner of my desk, suddenly buzzed with a startling ferocity. I glanced at it, expecting a notification from a client or a spam email. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, devoid of any niceties, and pulsing with an odd sort of playful urgency. "Open, or I'll knock louder." I stared at the words, my brow furrowed in confusion. Who would text something like that? It felt like a line from a movie, not a message meant for me. My first instinct was to ignore it. Some kind of prank, maybe. A wrong number. But then, a soft, deliberate knock sounded on my door, just loud enough to confirm the threat was real. I froze. My mind raced through the possibilities. It had to be Caleb. Who else could it be? But why was he texting me? I didn't even know he had my number. How did he get my number? Another buzz from my phone. Seriously, Lucas. Open up. The use of my name sent a jolt through me. Okay, this was definitely him. The building manager must have shared a resident contact list for emergencies or something. And this, apparently, qualified as one. A heavier knock followed, this one more insistent, making the frame of my old door rattle slightly. I let out a sigh, a mix of anxiety and profound curiosity. My quiet, predictable world was being knocked on, quite literally. So, I got up, walked to the door, and I opened it. He was standing there, looking even more disheveled than usual. His hair was damp from the rain, clinging to his forehead. He He was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was soaked through in patches, and he held his phone in one hand, a frantic energy radiating from him. But behind the urgency in his eyes, there was something else. A flicker of apology, maybe even a hint of desperation. "Sorry," he started, his voice a little breathless. "I know this is weird. I wouldn't bother you, but I have a bit of a situation." He gestured vaguely back toward his own apartment, the door of which was wide open. From where I stood, I could hear a sound I hadn't noticed before, a steady, rhythmic dripping. No, not dripping, more like a miniature waterfall. I peeked past him. The sight that greeted me made my jaw drop. Water was sheeting down from his ceiling, pooling on the floor of his entryway. It wasn't just a leak, it was a full-blown indoor rainstorm. A light fixture was sputtering ominously, and a puddle was rapidly advancing across the hall toward my own welcome mat. "The pipe in the apartment above me burst," he explained, running a hand through his wet hair, a gesture of pure exasperation. "The super is on his way, but he said it's going to take hours to shut off the main and assess everything. My entire apartment is flooding." He looked from the disaster in his apartment to me, his gaze direct and pleading. "Look, I hate to ask, but could I maybe hang out here for a bit? Just until the super gets it sorted? My phone's about to die, and all my stuff is getting ruined." My brain struggled to catch up. Caleb, in my apartment. The thought was both terrifying and ridiculously exciting. All my carefully constructed barriers were being washed away by a plumbing emergency. My quiet sanctuary was about to be invaded by the very person I'd spent months observing from a safe distance. There was no way I could say no. Not when he was standing there, looking so genuinely distressed, with a small river flowing out of his front door. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words sounding calmer than I felt. "Yeah, come in." I stepped back, holding the door wider. He gave me a look of immense relief, a small, genuine smile breaking through his stressed expression. "Thank you. Seriously, you're a lifesaver." He stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of rain and damp fabric, and something else, something uniquely him. And just like that, the wall between our worlds didn't just crumble, it was washed away in a deluge. He stood awkwardly in my small entryway, dripping onto the mat I'd meticulously placed by the door. He seemed hyper-aware of his presence in my space, as if he was afraid of breaking something. It was a stark contrast to the loud, confident persona I'd built up in my head. In my apartment, he seemed smaller, more human. "You can, have a seat," I offered, gesturing toward my living room. "Do you need a towel?" He nodded gratefully. "That would be amazing." I retrieved a clean towel from the linen closet, my hands feeling clumsy. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a totally insignificant moment, but it sent a spark up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. He didn't seem to notice, too preoccupied with drying his hair and face. "I can't believe this," he muttered, mostly to himself, as he slumped onto my sofa. "I just finished replastering that ceiling last month." There was a genuine note of defeat in his voice that I hadn't expected. I had imagined him as someone who could handle anything, who could just fix a problem with a drill and some spackle. Seeing him so completely at the mercy of a burst pipe was disarming. I found myself wanting to make him feel better, an impulse that surprised me with its strength. "I can make some tea," I offered, the most domestic, comforting thing I could think of. He looked up, his hazel eyes seeming to really see me for the first time, not just as the quiet neighbor across the hall. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "Tea would be great." "Thanks, Lucas." Hearing him say my name in the quiet of my own living room felt strangely intimate. As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could feel his eyes on me. I was intensely aware of every move I made, the clink of the mugs, the whistle of the kettle. This was the most time we had ever spent in the same room, and the silence was filled with a strange, buzzing energy. It wasn't entirely uncomfortable, just new, uncharted territory. He finally broke the silence. "You have a really nice place," he said. I glanced over my shoulder. He was looking around, taking in my prints on the wall, the stacks of books, the tidy but lived-in space. "It's, calm." I couldn't help a small, self-deprecating smile. "Yeah, that's me. Calm." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound that warmed the room. "Nothing wrong with calm. My place always looks like a hardware store exploded. It's organized chaos, but it's still chaos." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So, you're an artist or something? I see the delivery guys dropping off those big flat packages for you all the time." I was taken aback. He'd noticed that? I thought I was the only one doing the observing. "I'm an illustrator," I clarified, bringing the 2 mugs of tea over and setting one on the coaster in front of him. "Mostly children's books and some editorial stuff." I sat in the armchair opposite the sofa, creating a respectable distance between us. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "No way. That's really cool. I always wished I could draw. I have all these ideas in my head for furniture or layouts, but getting them onto paper." He trailed off, shaking his head. My sketches looked like a toddler did them with his non-dominant hand. It was the first crack I'd seen in his confident facade. The man who wielded power tools with such assurance was insecure about his drawing ability. This revelation was surprisingly endearing. It made him seem less like an archetype and more like a real person. "It's just practice," I said quietly. "Like anything else." He took a sip of his tea, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe." We sat in a more comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the rain outside and the occasional frantic text he'd send to the building super. As the hours stretched on, we started to talk more. He told me about his small contracting business, how he loved taking old, neglected spaces and bringing them back to life. He spoke about wood grains and support beams with a passion I usually reserve for color palettes and character design. And I, in turn, found myself opening up in a way I rarely did with anyone. I told him about the book I was currently working on, a story about a shy little firefly who was afraid of his own light. He listened intently, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. He wasn't just being polite, he was genuinely curious. At one point, he got up to look more closely at a print I had framed on the wall, a detailed forest scene. As he leaned in, he pointed to a tiny figure hidden amongst the leaves. "Is that the firefly?" he asked. I was stunned. It was a tiny, almost invisible detail, a little Easter egg I'd put in for myself. No one had ever noticed it before. "Yeah," I breathed out, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. "That's him." Caleb turned to look at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I like him," he said. "He's just not ready to shine yet." The way he said it, the knowing look in his eyes, it felt like he was talking about more than just a character in a drawing. It felt like he saw me. In that small, quiet moment, surrounded by the sound of a storm both outside and across the hall, I felt a connection spark between us. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. The super finally managed to turn off the water main late into the night. Caleb's apartment was a disaster zone, but at least the immediate crisis was over. He came back to my place looking utterly exhausted, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The initial adrenaline had worn off, replaced by the grim reality of the situation. "They have to rip out the ceiling and part of the wall," he said, his voice flat. "It's going to be days, maybe a week, before it's habitable again." He sank back onto my sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I don't even know where I'm going to stay." My heart went out to him. I saw my own worst-case scenario reflected in his predicament. The violation of one's personal space, the chaos, the uncertainty. Before I could even think it through, the words were leaving my mouth. "You can stay here." The moment I said it, a part of my brain screamed in panic. "Here? With me? In my small, one-bedroom apartment?" It was a reckless, impulsive offer, born from that strange new connection we'd forged over tea and talk of shy fireflies. He lifted his head, his eyes wide with surprise. "What? No, I couldn't. I've already imposed enough." He started to protest, but I could see the flicker of profound relief in his expression. He had nowhere else to go. "Don't be ridiculous," I insisted, my voice firmer than I expected. "It's a huge sofa. It pulls out. It's the least I can do. We're neighbors." The word neighbors felt flimsy and inadequate to describe the shifting dynamic between us, but it was a safe anchor in this sudden storm of intimacy. After a moment of hesitation, he finally relented. "Are you sure?" I nodded. Positive, a wave of gratitude washed over his face, so open and sincere it made my stomach do a nervous flip. "Lucas, thank you. I really thank you." And so my quiet, solitary life gained a roommate. The next few days were a strange blend of awkwardness and unexpected comfort. I tried to stick to my work routine, but it was impossible not to be aware of him. His presence filled my small apartment. It was in the scent of his soap in the bathroom, the sound of his breathing from the living room at night, the way he left his boots perfectly aligned by the door. He was an incredibly considerate guest. He was clean, quiet when I was working, and insisted on buying groceries or ordering dinner to pay his rent, but it was in the small, in-between moments that the real connection began to deepen. It was in the easy way we fell into a rhythm in the kitchen, him chopping vegetables while I stirred a pot on the stove, moving around each other in a comfortable, unspoken dance. One evening, he found my sketchbook lying on the coffee table. I usually guarded it fiercely, but I'd left it out by mistake. He picked it up, his expression hesitant. "Can I?" he asked, his voice low. I felt a surge of panic, my private world about to be exposed. But looking at his earnest face, I found myself nodding. "Okay." He sat on the floor and carefully turned the pages. I watched him, my heart pounding, as he looked at my sketches, landscapes, character studies, abstract emotional drawings. I expected him to be polite but uninterested. Instead, he was captivated. He would pause on certain pages, his brow furrowed in concentration, tracing a line with his finger without actually touching the paper. He stopped on a drawing of a man sitting on a rooftop, looking out over a stylized, geometric city. "I feel like this sometimes," he said softly, not looking up at me. "Like you've built all this stuff around you, but you're still kind of separate from it all." He had articulated the exact feeling I had been trying to capture, a feeling I often felt myself. He understood. He didn't just see the lines, he saw the meaning behind them. That hidden vulnerability I'd only glimpsed before was now fully on display. This confident, capable man felt a sense of isolation, too. That night, something shifted. The awareness between us became a tangible thing, a low hum beneath every conversation. When he handed me a plate, his fingers would brush against mine, and the contact would linger in the air for a moment too long. We'd be watching a movie on the couch, my small couch, which forced a certain proximity, and I'd be so acutely aware of the warmth of his body next to mine that I couldn't focus on the screen. I found myself caught in a dizzying spiral of hope and fear. Every kind word, every shared laugh, every lingering glance felt like a clue, a breadcrumb leading me toward a possibility I was terrified to even name. But then the fear would creep back in. Maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe he was just being friendly, grateful for a place to stay. I was the quiet, artistic guy, and he was the handsome, outgoing contractor. The old script I had written for us was a hard one to abandon. I was just reading into things because I wanted to. Right. The turning point came on the 5th night he was staying with me. He'd had a frustrating day dealing with the insurance company and the restoration crew. He came back to the apartment looking utterly defeated, a deep weariness etched into his face. He barely spoke during dinner, just pushing food around his plate. Later, we were sitting on the couch, a mindless sitcom playing on the television. He was quiet, his gaze fixed on the screen but not really seeing it. I could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. I wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but I didn't know how. The new intimacy between us was still too fragile. He let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned his head back against the cushions, closing his eyes. "I'm so tired of this," he murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Tired of dealing with people, tired of my place being a wreck." He shifted, turning slightly toward me. The space between us on the couch seemed to shrink to nothing. We sat there in silence for a long time, the canned laughter from the TV filling the space between us. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way his dark eyelashes rested against his skin. The energy in the room was charged, a mix of his exhaustion and my own nervous anticipation. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. Slowly, as the minutes ticked by, his breathing deepened and evened out. The tension in his shoulders began to release. He had fallen asleep. My first instinct was to get up, to give him space, to retreat to the safety of my bedroom. But I was frozen, pinned by the intensity of the moment. He shifted again in his sleep, a soft mumble escaping his lips. His body listed toward mine, drawn by gravity or some other, unspoken force. And then, his head came to rest on my shoulder. It was a light pressure at first, hesitant, as if even in sleep he was unsure. I remained perfectly still, my entire body rigid. My heart was hammering against my ribs so loudly I was sure it would wake him. His head was heavy against my shoulder, his hair brushing against my neck. I could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. It was the most profoundly intimate thing I had ever experienced. There was nothing sexual about it, yet it felt more revealing than any kiss. It was an act of pure, unconscious trust. In his most vulnerable and unguarded state, he had leaned on me. Literally. I didn't move for what felt like hours. I let my arm, which was resting on the back of the couch, drape loosely around his shoulders. It felt right, natural, as if it belonged there. The sitcom ended, and the television went dark, plunging the room into the soft glow of the city lights outside. I just sat there, in the quiet dark, with Caleb sleeping on my shoulder, and I allowed myself, for the first time, to feel the full, terrifying force of my hope. In that silent, fragile moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't imagining things after all. I must have eventually drifted off myself, lulled by the quiet rhythm of his breathing. I woke with a start to the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the window. For a confusing second, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt the weight on my shoulder, and it all came rushing back. My neck was stiff, my arm had gone numb, but I didn't care. Caleb began to stir, a low groan rumbling in his chest. He shifted, lifting his head slowly, his movements thick with sleep. He blinked a few times, his eyes hazy and unfocused. Then, his gaze landed on me, and full awareness dawned. He realized where he was, where he had been sleeping all night. A deep blush crept up his neck, and he pulled back so quickly he almost fell off the couch. "Oh my God," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just so tired. I can't believe I fell asleep on you." He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor as he ran a hand over his face, the picture of mortification. The warm, intimate bubble we had been in all night popped, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. "It's fine," I said, my own voice sounding unnaturally high. "Really, it's no big deal," but it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. Something had changed between us in the night, and now, in the harsh light of morning, neither of us knew what to do with it. The rest of that day was a masterclass in avoidance. We moved around each other like magnets with the same poles, constantly repelling. We made polite, stilted conversation about the weather and the progress on his apartment. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, was charged with an unspoken tension. He spent most of the day on the phone, pacing in the small space, creating a barrier of business between us. I retreated to my desk, hiding behind my monitor, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a chaotic mess, replaying the moment he'd rested his head on my shoulder over and over again. I analyzed it from every possible angle. Was it just an accident, a simple act of a tired man seeking comfort? Or was it something more? A subconscious admission of a feeling he couldn't yet say out loud? Hope and fear were at war within me. The hope was a fragile, beautiful thing, but the fear was a familiar, powerful beast. Fear told me I was being foolish, that I was projecting my own desires onto a kind, straight man who was just grateful for my help. What if I had made him uncomfortable? What if my own stillness, my not pushing him away, had been a mistake? Maybe he was just too polite to say anything. Maybe my quiet acceptance had been misinterpreted, or worse, had revealed the very feelings I was trying so desperately to hide. The anxiety was crippling. I felt like I was back behind that wall, but this time, he was on the inside with me, and the space was far too small for us both to pretend we couldn't feel the electricity in the air. The next day, the news came that his apartment would be ready by the evening. The restoration crew had worked quickly. He could finally go home. A part of me was flooded with relief. The tension would be gone. My apartment, my life, could go back to normal. But a much larger part of me felt a profound, aching disappointment. Normal was safe, yes, but normal was also lonely. I had grown used to his presence, to the quiet hum of another life intertwined with mine. The thought of it disappearing was unexpectedly painful. He spent the afternoon packing up the few things he'd brought over. I watched him from my desk, the silence stretching between us, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. I wanted to tell him I'd miss him. I wanted to ask him what last night meant. But the words were stuck in my throat, choked by years of practiced caution. And so I said nothing. Finally, everything was packed. His duffel bag sat by the door, a final, concrete symbol of his departure. He stood in the entryway, the same spot where he had stood dripping and frantic just a week ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. He turned to me, his hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. "Well," he said, his voice quiet. "I guess this is it." My heart sank. This was the end of it. He would go back to his apartment, I would stay in mine, and we would revert to being strangers who exchanged polite nods in the hallway. The connection we'd built, the intimacy we'd shared, would just fade away like a dream. "Thank you again, Lucas," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. His gaze was intense, searching for everything. "You really saved me." I just nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. "It was nothing," I managed to whisper, which was the biggest lie I had ever told. He reached for the doorknob, and my stomach plummeted. This was the last chance. "Say something, you idiot." My brain screamed, but I couldn't. He started to open the door, and I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and definite. And then he stopped. He let go of the doorknob and turned back to face me, his expression a mixture of frustration and resolve. "You know what?" he said, his voice suddenly stronger. "This is stupid." I blinked, confused. "What's stupid?" He took a step toward me, closing the small distance between us. This weirdness. I can't just walk out of here and pretend the last week didn't happen." My breath hitched in my throat. He was going to say it. He was going to address the giant, unspoken thing that had been living in my apartment with us. He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into deep water. "Look, I'm not very good at this," he started, his confident exterior completely gone, replaced by a raw, beautiful vulnerability. "I spend all my time fixing things, but when it comes to this stuff, I'm clueless." He gestured vaguely between us. "But I know what I feel. And this week, staying here with you, it's been the best week I've had in a really long time." He looked down at the floor for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then his eyes shot back up to mine, clear and unwavering. "The leak was real," he said, a small, sheepish smile playing on his lips. "But I might have exaggerated how long I needed to stay, just by a day or two. The apartment was fine yesterday. I didn't want to leave." The confession hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. He hadn't been staying out of necessity. He had been staying because he wanted to be here, with me. "And last night," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "when I fell asleep on you, that wasn't an accident. I mean, I was exhausted, but a part of me knew what I was doing. It just felt right, being close to you." My mind was reeling, trying to process his words. All my anxious overthinking, all my fear and self-doubt, it was all being systematically dismantled by his honesty. He saw the turmoil on my face, and his expression softened. "I've been trying to find a way to talk to you for months, Lucas," he admitted, "ever since I moved in. But you were always so quiet, so contained. I didn't know how to approach you." The burst pipe felt like a sign. He took another step, so close now that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know this is a lot, and maybe I'm reading this all wrong. If I am, just tell me, and I'll walk out that door and we can go back to being neighbors. But I really hope I'm not." He paused, his gaze searching mine, giving me an out. But I didn't want an out. For the first time in my life, I wanted in. All the way in. I found my voice, and though it trembled slightly, it was filled with a certainty that came from deep within my soul. "You're not reading it wrong," I said. Relief washed over his face, so potent it was like watching the sun come out from behind the clouds. A slow smile spread across his lips, the genuine, eye-crinkling smile that I had admired from afar for so long. And then he closed the final inch between us. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm, and he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant or questioning. It was a kiss of confirmation, a kiss that tasted of relief and hope and the beginning of something wonderful. It was a kiss that said all the things we hadn't been able to say all week. And I kissed him back, pouring all of my own fear and hope and unspoken longing into it, feeling the last piece of that old, protective wall inside me finally turn to dust. In the weeks that followed, my world bloomed with color. The quiet, monochrome existence I had known was suddenly vibrant. Caleb didn't move his things back across the hall. Instead, his life seemed to merge naturally with mine. His toolbox found a permanent home in my hall closet, next to my art supplies. His coffee mug became a fixture on my kitchen counter. My apartment, once a solitary sanctuary, became our shared space, filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable silence of two people who were simply happy to be in the same room. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating on a design. He learned that I needed absolute quiet for the first hour of the morning, but that I made the best pancakes he'd ever had. We went on dates, to museums he'd never been to, and to hardware stores I never thought I'd enter. He would explain the merits of different types of wood, and I would point out the subtleties of light in a painting. We were showing each other our worlds, and we found that they weren't so different after all. One rainy Sunday, a couple of months later, we were lying on the couch in our living room. The television was on, but we weren't watching it. I was sketching in my book, and Caleb was leaning against me, his head resting comfortably on my shoulder, a position that was now as familiar and easy as breathing. He was looking at my drawing, a portrait I was doing of him. He pointed to the page. "You made me look heroic," he said with a soft laugh. I smiled. "Well, you did save me from a life of quiet desperation." He chuckled and pressed a light kiss to my temple. "I think it was the other way around," he said. "You saved me from a flooded apartment, remember?" We both laughed, because it was a callback to the absurd, chaotic event that had brought us together. The plumbing emergency felt like a story from another lifetime. Looking at him then, so at ease and so perfectly at home in my arms, I thought about how much I had been afraid of. I had been afraid of the noise, of the disruption, of letting someone into my carefully controlled world. I had built my walls so high to protect myself from getting hurt that I had almost blocked out the possibility of being happy. Caleb hadn't just knocked on my door that night. He had knocked down all of my defenses, not with force, but with a gentle, persistent vulnerability that mirrored my own. It's funny how life works sometimes, isn't it? You spend so long thinking you know exactly who you are and what you need, curating a life that feels safe. And then, someone shows up with a burst pipe and a hopeful heart, and they show you a world you never knew you were missing. He was my beautiful, unexpected flood, and he washed away the quiet loneliness I didn't even realize I was drowning in. And in its place, he left something real, something vibrant, something to build a new life on, together.